I play a lot of RPGs, and after you play RPGs for a while, you tend to have character classes that you always go back to. Me, I like playing swordsman, because I like swords. But every now and again, I like to play other classes as well. Mostly just to have fun with the weapons that they get. Now, if you play RPGs, you'll notice that there are certain tropes and traditions when it comes to character classes and the weapons they get. Warrior types get swords, rogues get knives, sometimes 2 knives, spellcasters get staves or wands, archers get bows, obviously, and healers get giant hammers. Wait, what? So what's the deal with healers and giant hammers? The short answer is, Dungeons & Dragons did it, and the idea is just kinda stuck. From the Advanced D&D Player's Handbook, clerics are forbidden to use edged and or pointed weapons which shed blood. And since a giant hammer isn't edged or pointed, why not a hammer? As for the long answer, that's going to need a bit of a history lesson. First though, some clarifications. 1. Fantasy healers are usually based on medieval European holy orders, that is, the clergy, which is where the word cleric comes from. 2. Hammers and maces are the same basic sort of weapon. That is, they're blunt bits of metal on the end of a stick designed to beat the ever-living daylights out of someone, usually a dude in armor. So, the question is, was there ever a rule that said clergy weren't allowed to use weapons that could draw blood? This is certainly something that a lot of people believed, especially around the Victorian era. As the legendary expert on medieval weaponry Ewart Oakeshott wrote, there is a persistent legend that in Western Europe during the Middle Ages, the mace was a favourite, or the only, weapon of churchmen. But the Victorians made up a lot of dubious historical facts, and as Oakeshott goes on to argue, it seems a bit simple to think that it's okay to beat the living daylights out of someone as long as you don't draw blood, and expect God to be okay with that. And besides, looking at some of these fantasy hammers and maces, those things can definitely draw blood. So let's have a closer look at this rule. The first thing to consider would be Christian scripture. Reading from Matthew 26:52, all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Which sounds pretty convincing, but to me, this seems more like a moral warning than a specific rule. And it seems that this applies to everyone rather than just clergy, especially given that the clergy didn't exist yet. Given the context of this quote, it seems to me that the general lesson is, don't use swords or people with swords will kill you. In other words, violence just begets more violence. As far as I can tell, specific rules for clergymen don't really appear until the Council of Poitiers in 1078, which enjoined that any cleric who carried arms would be excommunicated. Which sounds pretty unambiguous, but this is a general ban against all weapons, not just edged ones that can draw blood. This would seem to be pretty good evidence for the idea that clerics weren't allowed to use weapons, but I had a closer look at this, and it seems that in Western Europe at least, the law was pretty relaxed. The basic argument was that self-defense was a natural right, and clerics had the right to defend themselves, with weapons if they had to. So the end result was, while clerics probably shouldn't use weapons, they could. This is still a fairly general statement about weapons though. So where does that whole thing with weapons not drawing blood come from? It seems that, of all places, it comes from the Bayeux Tapestry. You know, that thing that depicts the Norman conquest of England. Or where all those funny medieval memes come from. Specifically, it comes from the figure of Bishop Odo, who seems to be wielding what looks like a mace. Or at least some kind of bashy stick thing. So clerics weren't really supposed to be using weapons, yet here's a bishop who's very definitely armed. So what's up with that? The idea seems to be that, well, it's not really a weapon. I mean, it's just a stick. You can't cut or stab someone, and something that can't cut or stab isn't really a weapon, is it? So we find a bit of a loophole, and this seems to be where the D&D idea comes from. Problem solved. But few things that need to be pointed out. First, it's a bit of a silly loophole. Second, the bishop isn't the only one using that weapon. The same sort of thing appears in the hand of his brother, the Duke, soon to be King, William the Conqueror, who can use whatever he well pleases. So the mace isn't really a churchman's weapon. It's more a weapon for those in power who aren't really expected to fight. It's a symbol of authority, and it still is. Many parliaments around the world still have a ceremonial mace, even today. Third, and this is probably the biggest nail in the coffin, there are lots of descriptions of very high-ranking clerics using edged weapons. The most famous example is probably in the Song of Roland, one of France's most popular epic poems written somewhere between 1050 and 1060, describing events during the reign of Charlemagne, and for those who are interested, also providing the inspiration for Fire Emblems 6 and 7. In this, we find the character of Turpin, who's an archbishop and who uses a sword of burnished steel named Mace. And yes, it's very clear that Mace is a sword, not a mace named Al. The meaning of the word isn't clear, but it seems to come from the Old Norse word Almusa, which means giving alms. So a sword that gives charity, which is a pretty fun idea. And it wasn't just for show either. In the poem, the Archbishop Turpin uses his sword a lot. He's quoted as striking 1,000 blows and more. So much for clerics not being warriors, eh? Given how popular the Song of Roland was, no one seemed to find this particularly weird or unusual, the fact that there was this cleric with a sword. So it seems that while there is some basis for clerics not using edged weapons, no one seemed to take it all that seriously. Really, it was just a convention. So what does all this mean? Well, now you know why there's a tendency to have healers carrying around giant hammers, or maces. It's mostly a fashion thing, which I suppose, if you think about it, could make the fantasy world a more interesting place, but there wasn't ever a rule about it. So, the next time you're playing an RPG, there's no need to limit your healers to just giant hammers. Let healers use swords. As far as healing is concerned, a sword isn't any less useful than a giant hammer. And sometimes, a sword might even be more useful.